Should you rent to friends or family? That's the question. I see this question pop up often in the BiggerPockets forums, the One Rental at a Time community, or on social media, where somebody just says something like, should I rent to my kid or should I rent to my nephew? And I see two of the most common generic answers that are both wrong. Should you rent to friends or family? That's the question that pops up. The first answer comes most often from those people who've probably never owned a rental or owned one and failed. But the first answer is no, absolutely not. Never mix business and pleasure, never do business with friends or family, never rent to friends or family. And I think that's probably a safe answer, but I think it's wrong. The second most common answer that I see to should you rent to friends or family comes from the socialists among us who go, if you have a rental available and you have a friend or family member who needs a place to stay, you should let them stay there for free. And they're wrong. So the two most common answers I think are wrong. Doesn't mean they're wrong. It means I think they're wrong. So I'm going to use real life examples, my personal experience as to should you rent to friends or family or not. When I first started, my first year, and this usually sounds so bad, I want to tell people the ending so that they know that the beginning can be bad, and it's still worth doing. I invested for 12 years and I retired after 12 years of investing. I didn't start until I was 40, so I retired at 52 in 2022, been retired for about 2.5 years now. It's absolutely possible and it's worth doing. But when we start is when we tend to make our biggest mistakes. So I wasn't in a good position. And this is how a lot of people start in real estate, not in a good position. Hopefully not as bad as mine. But I was laid off from law enforcement, right? And the 2008 housing crash happened, and when there's a recession, there's no more crime, so we don't need cops anymore. And I got laid off at the same time as a bunch of other qualified officers. I was a single parent with 3 kids, found out about $89,000 in bad debt in my name that I didn't know existed till the divorce. Started teaching at a CDL school, making $17 an hour, so I wasn't in a great position, didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of reserves, didn't have high income. So mistakes in real estate, when you're not in a good position, can usually stop you in your tracks. Mine almost did. I owned the house we lived in, and I wanted to buy rentals, but I had a bad debt to income ratio. So what I ended up doing is moved into an apartment to rent out my house. Lender said this would, after 2 years, get me around my bad debt to income ratio. But since I wasn't buying a rental, I was just moving into an apartment and renting out my house, I didn't feel like a real landlord. So I didn't run it like a business. I thought, there's no way I could trust a stranger, so I want to rent to a friend. And if I'm renting to a friend, I sure don't want a lease, right? A lease contract between me and a friend, that'd be just weird. And that blew up in my face by design. Like I set it up to fail. Rent became late, and since I was a single parent and he was a single parent, I know life is rough. So his life's probably rough, so I understood. Late became never. When I went to the house to say, hey, why aren't you paying the rent? He didn't even live there. He had moved out and rented the house to someone else and was collecting rent. I set that up. That's completely my fault. So in the beginning, when you don't have a lease, you don't have your systems in place, should you rent to friends or family? Universally, and remember, the less a man makes declarative statements, the less apt he is to look foolish in retrospect, so never say never. But in the beginning, never rent to friends or family. I'm going to use the example of how to tell who a real friend is and who a real family member is, and whether you should rent to them or not. Once you have your systems in place, once you have your lease, and once you have the backbone to stick to the lease. My family owns residential tree services, some logging, but mostly residential tree services. My dad owned a company. My 2 brothers owned their own companies. One's retired. I joined the Marines because that was so much easier than tree work. And here's how, as a family, I worked with all 3 of their companies, right? I was the youngest of the siblings, the slave labor. And we would have friends or family members reach out and say, here's how we knew if they were real friends or not. They would reach out and say, hey, you run a tree service. My trees are either overgrown, dangerous split, too close to the house, whatever. We have to have some work done. Can you come and do it? So the not real friends would say, how about you come over this weekend? We do the work, I'll help you, which they don't know what they're doing, so they can't help. That'd be dangerous. And then they'll say, well, we'll throw a barbecue. We'll buy all the meat, we'll buy everything, we'll throw a barbecue. Because you run a business, we're your friend, you should do this. So that's not a real friend. Because they're looking at getting probably $1,500 worth of work done for $200 worth of barbecue stuff that you would go and have a barbecue with them anyways. Anyway, a real friend, and I'll use the example of like the Cluths, right? Cliff and then his kids, Robert, Raymond, Richard. And they would reach out and say, hey, you own a tree service. We need some tree work. We have a tree that's either overgrown, it's got a dangerous split, it's too close to the house. We've got a couple of estimates, and it looks like it's going to take about $1,500 to get this done. Since you run a business, can you do this for $1,500? We'll show you the other estimates. We would just rather our money went to friends than to some business we don't know. That's a real friend. So yeah, you'd go do the work. You'd probably get $1,000 for it. You give them a nice friends and family discount, but they're not ripping you off getting $1,500 worth of work done for $200. They're not taking advantage of the relationship. So if you own rentals and you have friends or family, here's the second test. First, if they rent from you, they should be paying what any other tenant would pay. They should pass the credit check. They should have the deposit. You should treat it like a business. You might give them the friends or family discount on rent, but to start, it should look like a lease to anyone else. Here's the warning sign on any tenant, whether it's a friend or family member. If someone reaches out, you do not rent to them. If you're on social media and you see a post in a local Facebook group, something that says, does anybody in Chandler, Arizona have a 3-bedroom rental available? My family has been looking for 2 weeks. We can't find anything. Does anybody have anything available? You never rent to that person. Just go on Zillow and I don't even know, but go to Chandler, Arizona and look at how many rentals are available. There are tons of rentals that they can find. Probably multiple dozens. They either don't want to pay market rent. Why would you rent to them? Don't qualify. Why would you rent to them? So if you see someone reaching out, there are rentals available in almost every market. But people don't want to pay market rents, and maybe they don't qualify. That's not who you want to rent to. I have a daughter who I'm currently renting to. In the beginning, I probably would have rented for like a tenth of what rents go for, not had a lease, been walked all over, taught her very bad things about life. But what I did is she moves in with her boyfriend and they're paying, at the time, it was like $1,300 a month for rent. It was pretty high for the area. I have a unit come available. I was going to rent out for $1,100 because I keep my rents just below area average. And I tell my daughter, hey, why don't you guys move in there? You'll save a little bit of money on rent. There's a lease. The rent is paid on time. And people say, well, if your daughter paid the rent late, would you evict her? Absolutely. Because I didn't raise my daughter to be a scumbag. Not only does she pay her rent, but she pays it early. This is how I raised her to be. She's a decent human being. I know that before she moves in. My nephew gets out of the military. He's going to move to the area. And I tell him, I've got a unit available. Why don't you rent it? It'll be just below area average rents. Absolutely zero problems. Now, that it goes both ways. I'm a proactive landlord. When a tenant reaches out with an issue, it's fixed as fast as possible. And so it is a business transaction where a lease is in place and I have my systems in place. If you're just starting out in real estate and you don't have your landlord legs under you and you don't have a backbone and you have friends or family members who you know are scumbags, don't rent to them. Once you have your systems in place and you have a backbone and you know your friends or family members that are decent human beings, I have no problem renting to them. There isn't a clear-cut, never do it, always do it answer that you see in social media. It is nuanced. In the beginning, you don't know what you don't know. And in the last couple of years, You can book an hour with me at diontalk.com, and I've done dozens and dozens of let me look at your portfolio, tell you your best next step, or look at a deal with you, or whatever the call is based on. And I want to say about half, I think literally 50% of the people that I've had the hour calls with have a rental, or an accidental landlord got a rental somehow. But they have their aunt or their cousin or their sister living in it. And they say, yeah, I'm losing money on this one, so I want to make sure the next one I do right. They shouldn't be doing that in the first place. That's the mistake. The mistake isn't on the next one, I'm going to do it better. The mistake is doing it wrong in the first place, like I did. Lesson learned. So trying to share the lesson of the moment you have a rental, whether it is one you acquire, inherit, move out of to rent out, I'm giving you permission to be an actual real life landlord. Get a lease, retain an eviction attorney, stick to your lease. Your tenants are going to. You think if you rent to your aunt and she doesn't charge you rent, or you don't charge her rent, that if the stove stops working, she's not going to call and say, hey, your stove's not working, and you're going to put a stove in it? So that's my answer in summation. This was a nice short live on my phone. Hopefully the sound worked. I will look at all of the chat afterwards. I don't get to generally see them on my phone. If you want your questions answered during a live stream, every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, I do a live stream that lasts as long as the questions do. Have a day full of awesome.